Airline refused to board Black CEO. Minutes later, he took off in his own jet. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel is losing traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can help us. It's quick, free, and allows us to continue bringing you great content. Your support means everything. Let's keep this channel growing collectively. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the story. The runway was quiet in the way only private airfields ever are. No boarding announcements. No rushing crowds. Just heat shimmering above the asphalt and the low, steady hum of a jet cooling down after landing. A sleek, white private jet stood still under the afternoon sun. And then, the cabin door opened. A tall black man in a dark, tailored suit stepped into view. He moved with measured confidence, one hand resting lightly on the rail as he descended the narrow staircase. Polished black shoes touched each step without hurry. His posture was straight, calm, unbothered, as if the entire world had learned to wait on his timing. At the bottom of the stairs, he paused. Not for the cameras, not for attention, but because he felt it. The eyes. Across the tarmac, a line of airline employees stood frozen, flight attendants in Navy uniforms. A ground supervisor gripping a tablet too tightly. A junior crew member whose mouth had fallen open without permission. Shock rippled through them like a silent wave. One attendant leaned toward another and whispered, barely audible but unmistakable. Wait, wasn't that him? Another swallowed hard. The one at gate C-17? The memory hit them all at once. Because less than 20 minutes earlier, this same man had been standing inside a crowded commercial terminal, holding a boarding pass that no one wanted to honor. Cut back. The terminal had been loud, crowded, rushed. Passengers shuffled forward. Announcements echoed overhead. Screens flickered with delays and gate changes. And there he was, alone. No entourage, no assistant, no security detail clearing a path. Just a black man in a clean suit, travel bag in hand, waiting his turn like everyone else. When he reached the counter, the gate agent barely looked up at first. Then she did. Her eyes scanned him, not the boarding pass, not the name. Him. She frowned. "Sir," she said flatly, tapping at the screen. "There seems to be an issue." He remained still, silent, patient. Another agent leaned over, glancing once at the ticket, then longer at his clothes, at his face. "Are you sure you're at the right gate?" That was the first cut. The second came moments later. "This flight is full." Behind him, a white couple stepped forward. Same destination, same time. They were waved through without a word. No questions, no hesitation. When he spoke, his voice was even, controlled. My ticket scanned green. The supervisor arrived. Older, sharper, confident in authority. She didn't lower her voice. "Sir, this airline has certain standards. You'll need to step aside." Around them, people watched, pretended not to, listened anyway. He could have argued, could have raised his voice, could have demanded respect. He didn't. He simply nodded once, stepped back and walked away. Now, back on the tarmac. The same people who dismissed him stood staring as he reached the ground and adjusted his cuffs. One attendant finally spoke, her voice tight with disbelief. "That's a private jet." The ground supervisor's face drained of color as a realization settled in. Not loud, not dramatic, just devastating. Because the man they had refused to board hadn't missed his flight. He had merely chosen a different one. And as the jet's engines began to warm behind him, one truth became painfully clear. They hadn't denied him access because of policy. They had denied him because they never imagined someone like him could be in control of everything they were about to watch take off. The thing about power, real power, is that it doesn't announce itself. It walks in quietly. 20 minutes earlier, before the runway and the jet and the stunned faces, he had entered the terminal through sliding glass doors that hissed open and shut behind him like nothing important had just arrived. No heads turned. No one stopped him. That was the point. He adjusted the strap of his travel bag across his shoulder and moved with the slow, unremarkable pace of someone who had learned long ago that visibility invited judgment. His suit was tailored but understated. No logos, no shine. The kind of clothing that said competence without asking for permission to be believed. To everyone else, he was just another traveler. To himself, this was a test. He had taken dozens of flights on this airline over the years, knew the routes, knew the systems, knew the complaints that never made it past customer service emails, the whispers, the patterns, the stories that sounded eerily similar but were always dismissed as misunderstandings. So today, he flew alone. No assistance to smooth edges. No legal counsel to intimidate. No name-dropping to short-circuit bias. Just truth, walking in on its own. At gate C-17, the line moved quickly. Boarding had begun. Priority passengers passed through, greeted by name, waved forward with rehearsed smiles. When it was his turn, the gate agent took the boarding pass with 2 fingers, as if distance itself were a form of caution. She scanned it. Green light. Still, she didn't hand it back. Her eyes lifted slowly, traveling upward not to his face, but to the spaces around it, as if expecting someone else to appear, someone who made sense. "Sir," she said, frowning slightly. "One moment. If we comminder." That was the first pause. Behind her, another agent leaned in, whispering something too low to hear. Their eyes flicked toward him, then away, then back again. Not curiosity, assessment. He stood still. He had learned early in his career that stillness unsettled people more than anger ever could. Anger gave them an excuse. Stillness forced them to confront themselves. "Are you traveling alone?" the second agent asked. "S. Business or leisure?" "Business." "And 2. Rating the dime." She nodded, but her fingers hovered over the keyboard as if waiting for permission to believe him. The supervisor arrived seconds later, summoned not by protocol, but by discomfort. She was efficient, confident, the kind of woman who spoke in conclusions. "What seems to be the issue?" she asked, already looking at him like an answer she didn't want. The agent gestured vaguely. "There might be a seating conflict." He didn't interrupt, didn't point out that there were empty seats visible through the jet bridge window, didn't mention that 3 passengers had just boarded without their IDs checked at all. He waited. The supervisor glanced at the boarding pass, then at him. Then came the look, the one he recognized instantly. Not confusion, not concern, calculation. "This flight is very full," she said. "You may have been rerouted incorrectly." He met her eyes for the first time. "My ticket scanned green." "There. They doesn't." A beat passed. Then another. Behind him, the line slowed. People shifted, watched, pretended not to. The supervisor exhaled sharply, her patience thinning. "Sir," she said, lowering her voice in a way that was meant to sound professional but landed as something else entirely. "This airline has a certain standard for priority boarding." There it was. Not policy. Not procedure. Standard. She gestured subtly to the side. Not toward customer service. Not toward help. Away. A suggestion disguised as instruction. For a brief moment, just a flicker, he considered speaking. Correcting. Ending it right there. But that wasn't why he came. So he nodded once. Not in submission. In documentation. He turned, stepped out of line, and walked away as boarding continued behind him, uninterrupted. No one followed. No one stopped him. And as he disappeared down the corridor toward the private terminal across the tarmac, the gate agent finally handed the next passenger a boarding pass and smiled as if nothing out of the ordinary had just happened. None of them realized yet. They hadn't just turned away a passenger. They had just cleared the runway for the truth to land exactly where it would be impossible to ignore. From the moment he stepped out of line, the air behind gate C-17 changed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was subtle, like a room that had just made a decision it didn't want to admit out loud. The gate agent exhaled as if a problem had solved itself. She turned back to her screen, fingers moving faster now, confidence returning to her posture. Boarding resumed. Names were called. Smiles reappeared. Order restored. But not everyone felt comfortable. A young ground crew member standing near the podium glanced toward the corridor where the man had disappeared. He frowned, then looked back at the supervisor. "His ticket really did scan green," he said quietly. The supervisor didn't look up. "We're not reopening it," she replied. "Let's move." That should have been the end of it. But tension has a way of lingering when truth is pushed aside too quickly. A few passengers exchanged looks. One woman whispered to her partner, "Did you see that?" He shrugged, unsure whether curiosity was worth the risk of involvement. Most people chose silence. Silence was familiar. Safe. The supervisor straightened her blazer and scanned the area, making sure no one was filming, no one asking questions. To her, this wasn't about one passenger. It was about keeping the machine running smoothly. Delays were unacceptable. Disruptions even more so. What she didn't realize was that the disruption had already happened. Across the terminal, through a set of glass doors marked authorized personnel only, he moved in the opposite direction, away from noise, toward quiet. The private terminal smelled different. Cleaner, sharper, no crowds, no announcements competing for attention. Here, no one rushed him. A uniformed attendant looked up, met his eyes, and nodded once. "Good afternoon, sir." No hesitation. No suspicion, just acknowledgement. As he handed over a slim leather folder, the attendant glanced at the name, then at him again this time with recognition that didn't need explanation. "Your aircraft is ready." Back at gate C-17, the supervisor's tablet vibrated. She frowned, reading a system notification that didn't quite make sense. A service update, a status change. She refreshed the screen. "Still there." "What's wrong?" the gate agent asked. "Nothing," the supervisor replied too quickly. "Just a glitch." But her jaw tightened. Minutes passed. Boarding slowed as a mechanical check delayed final clearance. Passengers grew restless. A few groaned. Someone sighed loudly. Then another alert came through. This one wasn't a glitch. A cancellation notice. A service override. A partner-level update. Her fingers stiffened. "Did you request a hold?" the gate agent asked. "No," she snapped. "Of course not." She scanned the details again, heart rate ticking upward. Across the tarmac, engines began to hum. Not the commercial aircrafts, but something smaller, sleeker, controlled. A flight attendant standing by the window frowned. "Is that a private jet starting up?" she asked. The supervisor followed her gaze. And then she saw him, descending the stairs. The same man, the same suit, the same calm. Except now he wasn't waiting. He was moving with certainty. For a split second, denial flashed across her face. Then disbelief. Then something colder. Recognition. "No," she whispered. Around her, heads turned. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. One attendant's eyes widened. Another's mouth fell open. "That's him," someone said. A pit formed in the supervisor's stomach as the implications slammed into place not all at once, but piece by piece, each one heavier than the last. The ticket. The green scan. The override notice. The jet. This wasn't coincidence. This was consequence warming up on the runway. As the private jet's engines grew louder, drowning out the terminal noise, one unspoken realization spread through the group like a chill. They hadn't just questioned the wrong passenger. They had underestimated the wrong man. And the altitude gap between those two mistakes was about to become painfully, publicly clear. The first person to speak wasn't supposed to matter. He was young mid-20s at most, a ground operations assistant assigned to Gate C-17 for overflow support. No authority, no decision-making power. Just a headset, a tablet, and a job that trained him to follow instructions, not question them. But as the private jet's engines idled across the tarmac, something inside him refused to stay quiet. He stared through the glass again. The man was unmistakable now. Same stride, same posture, same calm that didn't ask permission to exist. And suddenly, the memory replayed in his mind with uncomfortable clarity. The green scan, the supervisor's pause, the way the decision had been made without ever being said out loud. He swallowed. "Hey," he said, low enough that it wasn't meant to carry. "That was the guy." The supervisor didn't respond. "He didn't do anything wrong," the young man continued, voice tightening. "I saw the scan myself. It cleared." This sevened. The gate agent shot him a warning look. A silent "don't." The supervisor finally turned. Her expression was sharp, controlled, practiced. "We've moved on," she said. "Focus on your role." "But," she cut him off with a raised hand. Not angry. Worse. Final. We are not revisiting this. Around them, the terminal buzzed again as if tension could be drowned out by movement. Passengers complained about the delay. Someone tapped their watch. Another muttered about incompetence. No one connected the dots yet. The young man looked back toward the window, watching as the suited figure paused at the bottom of the jet stairs. Watched as a pilot leaned in to speak to him with unmistakable respect. Something twisted in his chest. He had grown up watching moments like this from the outside, watching people get dismissed, overlooked, quietly redirected while being told it was policy, not prejudice. He'd promised himself that if he ever saw it up close, he wouldn't pretend it was nothing. But now it was close. Too close. If he was anyone else, the young man said quietly, we wouldn't have stopped him. The gate agent hissed under her breath. Do you want to lose your job? The question landed heavier than intended. Across the gate area, a flight attendant who had been silent until now stepped closer. Her eyes were fixed on the tarmac, on the jet, on the truth unfolding in real time. She knows, the attendant murmured. The supervisor. She knows now. The supervisor's tablet buzzed again. This time, she didn't hide it. Her eyes darted across the screen, her lips pressed into a thin line. Whatever authority she'd been standing on minutes earlier was starting to crumble under information she couldn't control. What's going on? The attendant asked. The supervisor snapped the tablet shut. Nothing that concerns you. But it did. Because the private jet had begun its final checks, ground crew moved with precision. No delays, no confusion. Efficiency reserved for those who belonged. A passenger nearby leaned toward his wife and whispered, Did they seriously turn that guy away? She nodded slowly. Looks like it. The young ground assistant felt heat rush to his face. This wasn't just about one decision anymore. It was about witnesses. People were starting to see. And once people saw, silence became a choice. He didn't raise his voice, the young man said, louder now. He didn't cause a scene. We did. The supervisor's head snapped toward him. That's enough. Peefuls. Her voice carried authority, but it shook just slightly. Because across the tarmac, the man in the dark suit turned not toward them, but toward the aircraft and gave a small nod. A signal, the jet responded. Engines roared louder, vibrating through the glass, through the gate, through the certainty that had protected bad decisions for far too long. And in that moment, as the private jet prepared to taxi forward, one truth became unavoidable. This story was no longer happening quietly, and the witnesses, whether they wanted to be or not, were now part of it. There was a moment quiet, almost invisible when everything crossed the line. It didn't come with shouting. It didn't come with raised hands. It came with a sentence. Back at gate C-17, the supervisor straightened her posture as if reclaiming authority through muscle memory. The delay had stretched too long. Eyes were on her now, and scrutiny made people reckless. She lifted her chin and said, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear, Sir, this airline has a certain image to maintain. I haven't his'n day. The words hung in the air. Not policy. Not procedure. Image. The young ground assistant felt his stomach drop. The flight attendant beside him inhaled sharply. A few passengers stopped pretending they weren't listening. The supervisor continued, her tone clipped, defensive. We can't accommodate everyone who thinks they belong in priority spaces. Belong. That word landed harder than she intended. The man didn't respond right away. He stood there, just outside the boarding line, travel bag still resting at his side. His expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes shifted. Not anger, memory. Years ago, standing in a glass-walled office while a senior partner flipped through his resume too quickly. You're impressive, the man had said, but our clients might not be comfortable. And applause. Another time, at a luxury hotel, where the concierge had smiled politely and asked if he was lost. Even after he said his room number. Different places. Same tone. He had learned something important over time. The moment someone tells you that you don't belong, they are revealing exactly who they believe does. Back in the terminal, the supervisor gestured toward the side, toward customer service desks, toward waiting areas, toward places designed to make people feel smaller while being told it was for their own good. You'll need to step aside, she said. We'll see what we can do. The young ground assistant took a step forward without thinking. "That's not fair," he said. His voice shook, but it was steady enough. He paid for that seat. The supervisor turned slowly, eyes narrowing. "You are overstepping," she warned. Around them, tension thickened. A passenger pulled out a phone, then hesitated. Another leaned forward in her seat, brows knit. The man finally spoke. Soft, calm, clear. "I won't be needing alternatives." The supervisor scoffed, a sound that carried more contempt than humor. "Sir," she said, lowering her voice in a way meant to assert dominance, "this conversation is over." That was it. Not because of the refusal, not even because of the disrespect, but because of the certainty with which she believed the power belonged to her. He nodded once. Not in agreement. In conclusion. He reached into his jacket, not for documents, not for proof, not for credentials meant to convince. He pulled out his phone. And he didn't turn away when he made the call. The young ground assistant watched his thumb move across the screen. One contact, one tap. "Proceed," the man said quietly. That was all. No explanation. No threats. The supervisor let out a short, dismissive laugh. "Who exactly are you calling?" He met her gaze for the first time since stepping out of line. "Someone who won't ask me if I belong." Across the tarmac, the private jet's engines surged. Louder now. Deeper. Purposeful. The glass vibrated. Passengers turned toward the windows as the sound rolled through the terminal like a warning. The flight attendant whispered, "Oh my God." The supervisor's confidence faltered just for a second, but it was enough. Her tablet buzzed again. Then again. System notifications stacked faster than she could dismiss them. Override. Priority clearance. Executive-level authorization. Her fingers trembled as she stared at the screen. "No," she whispered. "That's not." The roar outside swallowed the rest of her sentence. Because on the other side of the glass, the man she had just told to step aside was no longer standing still. He was walking toward something that did not wait for permission. And for the first time since she put on that uniform, the supervisor understood. This wasn't a complaint she could manage. This was a mistake with altitude. And it was already taxiing forward. The call ended before it ever truly began. No back and forth. No explanations layered with reassurance. Just one word, "Proceed," and the line went silent. He slipped the phone back into his jacket as if nothing significant had just happened. But the world around him began to respond immediately, like a system that had been waiting for authorization all along. Across the tarmac, the private jet's engines deepened in tone. Not louder, stronger. Purpose replaced idle hum. Ground crew snapped into motion, moving with practiced efficiency that didn't ask questions because questions had already been answered somewhere far above their pay grade. Inside the terminal, the supervisor stared at her tablet as if it had betrayed her. Executive routing confirmed. Priority clearance granted. Commercial partner services suspended. Her mouth opened slightly. That can't be right," she muttered. The gate agent leaned closer, eyes scanning the screen. The color drained from her face. "Those codes," she whispered. "We don't see those." Passengers were fully watching now. No more pretending. No more polite distance. A man in the front row stood and pressed his palm to the glass. "That's his plane," he said aloud. A woman beside him shook her head slowly. They turned him away. The young ground assistant felt his chest tighten not with fear, but clarity. This wasn't escalation. This was exposure. Outside, the man in the dark suit paused halfway across the tarmac. He turned slightly toward the terminal, not in confrontation, not in triumph, in acknowledgement, as if to say, "You had your chance." The supervisor rushed toward the window, her professional composure unraveling with each step. "Wait," she called, though her voice barely carried over the rising engine noise. "Sir," he didn't turn back. Not because he couldn't hear her. Because the conversation was over. The jet's door closed with a decisive seal. The stairs retracted. Ground crew cleared the area without hesitation, eyes forward, focused, trained. No one questioned who was on board. They already knew. Inside the terminal, the supervisor's radio crackled to life. "Gate C-17, a voice said, tight and formal. "Why is there an executive-level override flagged under your station?" Her throat tightened. I don't know," she replied. There must be a mistake. A pause. There is no mistake, the voice responded. Stand by. The line went dead. The gate agent looked at her, panic barely contained. What does that mean? The supervisor didn't answer, because across the runway, the private jet began to taxi. Slow, smooth, unapologetic. The engines drowned out the terminal noise completely now. Even the commercial aircraft nearby seemed secondary, waiting, irrelevant. The young ground assistant felt something shift inside him, not just in the moment, but in memory. He would remember this. The way silence had been used as a weapon until it wasn't. The way power hadn't shouted, hadn't needed to. Passengers began murmuring openly. That's crazy, someone said. They really messed up, another replied. He didn't say a word, a third added. Not one, and that was the part that unsettled them the most, because anger could be dismissed. Loudness could be controlled, but calm authority activated and undeniable left no room to argue. The jet reached the runway. For a split second, everything seemed suspended. Then the engines surged. Acceleration pressed the aircraft forward, lifting tons of steel and certainty into motion. As the private jet left the ground, climbing cleanly into open sky, one truth became impossible to escape. This was no longer about a missed flight. It was about who had been trusted to decide who belonged, and the cost of getting that wrong was now airborne visible to everyone, rising far above the gate where it all began. The jet lifted cleanly into the sky, banking slightly as it climbed, smooth, controlled, unquestioned. Inside the terminal, silence took its place. Not the awkward kind that comes from confusion. The heavy kind that settles after truth arrives without warning. Every eye followed the aircraft until it disappeared into the pale blue horizon. Conversations died mid-sentence. Complaints about delays no longer mattered. The gate screen still blinked with flight information, but no one was looking at it anymore. They were looking at each other. The supervisor stood frozen near the window, tablet hanging loosely in her hand like an object that had suddenly lost all authority. Her reflection stared back at her from the glass smaller than she remembered. A flight attendant finally broke the silence. That wasn't just a private passenger, she said quietly. The gate agent swallowed. I think he owns it. No one laughed, because every sign pointed to the same conclusion. The codes on the tablet. The immediate clearance. The way the jet had moved without waiting. This wasn't wealth trying to prove itself. This was ownership revealing itself after being challenged. The young ground assistant felt his pulse in his ears. He turned slowly toward the supervisor. You told him the airline had a standard, he said. Whose standard was that? She didn't answer. Her radio crackled again. Gate C-17, the voice returned. Confirm the interaction with the executive passenger. Executive. The word landed like a verdict. She pressed the button with a trembling thumb. We denied boarding due to. She stopped herself. Because suddenly, none of the reasons sounded legitimate enough to say out loud. There was a pause on the line, longer this time. Then the voice spoke, colder now, precise. Stand by for review. Do not leave your station. With back today, the radio went silent. Around them, passengers had begun recording openly. No one tried to stop them. There was nothing left to control. A man near the window shook his head slowly. He didn't yell, didn't threaten. Didn't even argue. A woman replied, he didn't need to. The young ground assistant looked back toward the runway, where heat shimmered over empty asphalt. That image, the man standing calmly at the base of the jet stairs, burned into his memory. Not because of what he said, but because of what he didn't. He hadn't demanded respect. He had demonstrated consequence. The supervisor finally spoke, her voice hollow. We couldn't have known. The words sounded weak even to her. The ground assistant met her gaze. You could have checked. That was the moment it fully unraveled. Because the truth wasn't that they didn't know who he was. The truth was that they never thought it mattered. An internal alert chimed on the gate, screen barely noticeable, but impossible to ignore once seen. Partner service review initiated. The gate agent's eyes widened. What does that mean? No one answered. They didn't have to. Somewhere above the clouds, the man sat in quiet comfort, not thinking about the gate, or the supervisor, or the looks. He had already moved past them. Down below, in the terminal, the consequences were just beginning to land. And in that space between what they assumed and what they witnessed, a final realization settled over Gate C-17. They hadn't denied a man access to a flight. They had exposed themselves, in front of an entire terminal, for believing that dignity had an appearance. And now that belief was on record. The fallout didn't arrive with sirens. It arrived with emails. One by one, screens around Gate C-17 began to light up, not with flight updates, but internal alerts, quiet pings, subtle vibrations, the kind of notifications that didn't mean trouble for passengers but spelled danger for staff. The supervisor's tablet buzzed again. Then again, her hands trembled as she opened the first message. Subject: immediate partner review, service conduct. Her breath caught. The second message came before she could finish reading the first. Subject: executive complaint logged, do not alter records. The gate agent leaned closer, eyes wide. What's happening? The supervisor didn't answer. She couldn't. Her throat felt tight, as if the air itself had decided she didn't deserve to speak yet. Across the terminal, a man in a blazer tapped his phone and muttered, "They're shutting something down." A woman filming whispered, "This just turned serious." Kumsun Tamanin, the young ground assistant, felt a chill crawl up his spine. This wasn't public outrage. This wasn't social media pressure. This was internal consequence. The supervisor's radio crackled again, this time louder, sharper. "Gate C-17 supervisor," a voice said. "No greeting, no warmth. Step away from the podium." She froze. Excuse me?" she asked. "Step away from the podium," the voice repeated. "This is not optional." Passengers fell silent. The gate agent looked at her, panic etched across her face. "What do we do?" The supervisor swallowed hard and slowly placed the tablet on the counter. The authority she had wielded so easily less than an hour ago now felt borrowed, temporary, revoked. She stepped back. A uniformed airport operations manager appeared moments later, flanked by two compliance officers. Their expressions were neutral, but their presence carried weight. "Is there a problem?" a passenger asked. The manager didn't answer him. Instead, she turned to the supervisor. "We're initiating a conduct review effective immediately," she said calmly. "You'll be relieved of gate responsibilities pending investigation." The words hit like a controlled detonation. The supervisor's face drained of color. "This is a misunderstanding," she said quickly. "We followed procedure." One of the compliance officers glanced at his tablet. "Procedure doesn't include denying an executive-level passenger based on assumption." Executive level. Again. The gate agent felt her knees weaken. "We didn't know who he was," she blurted out. The operations manager looked at her, not unkindly, but firmly. "That's the issue," she said. "You didn't think you needed to." Around them, phones continued recording. No one stopped. No one intervened. This wasn't spectacle. This was accountability happening in real time. The supervisor opened her mouth, searching for words that might still save her. None came. Because somewhere in the system, far beyond Gate C-17, a report was already being finalized. Time-stamped, logged, irreversible. A final notification appeared on the gate screen, visible to staff only. Partner privileges, temporarily suspended. The gate agent stared at it, horrified. "That affects all of us." The operations manager nodded. "Until review is complete." Wallen had aggressed all, a ripple of unease spread through the staff. This wasn't one person facing consequences. This was an entire culture being examined. The young ground assistant felt a strange mix of fear and relief. Fear for what would happen next. Relief that, finally, silence hadn't won. Outside, the runway was empty now. The jet was gone, but its absence felt louder than its presence ever had. As the supervisor was escorted away, not in handcuffs, not in disgrace, but in unmistakable loss of control. One passenger whispered to another. He didn't touch them. The other replied quietly, he didn't have to. Because the collapse hadn't come from retaliation. It came from exposure. And as Gate C-17 stood frozen under fluorescent lights, stripped of certainty, one truth settled over everyone watching. The most powerful consequence isn't punishment. It's the moment the system realizes it just revealed itself. and there's no way to pretend it didn't. High above the clouds, the cabin was quiet. No applause, no celebration, just the steady hum of flight and the soft glow of sunlight filtering through oval windows. He sat back in his seat, jacket folded neatly beside him, hands resting calmly as the aircraft leveled off. From up here, the airport was already shrinking into abstraction runways reduced to lines, terminals to shapes without faces. That was always how distance worked. What felt heavy on the ground became clear in the air. He didn't replay the confrontation, didn't savor the outcome, because this was never about winning. It was about revealing. Down below, Gate C-17 would resume operations. Flights would depart. New passengers would line up, unaware of what had just unfolded in that same space. But the system would remember. Records had been logged, decisions time-stamped, language preserved exactly as spoken. Assumptions don't disappear when exposed. They get examined. In the terminal, long after the jet had vanished from sight, the young ground assistant stood quietly near the podium, watching compliance officers finish their work. He felt different, not triumphant, not shaken. Awake. Nearby, a passenger lowered her phone and said softly, "He never even raised his voice." Another replied, "He raised the standard." That sentence lingered, because power that needs to shout is usually afraid it won't be heard. Power that moves in silence doesn't need permission. Somewhere between altitude and intention, he allowed himself a single thought, not of revenge, not of justice, but of alignment. Dignity shouldn't depend on recognition. Respect shouldn't require revelation. And yet, here they were. He leaned slightly toward the window, watching clouds roll past like a reset button pressed gently against the world. If there was a lesson in all of this, it wasn't that authority could humble arrogance. It was that bias collapses fastest when it meets calm, documented truth. No yelling. No spectacle. Just consequence. As the jet continued forward, leaving behind a terminal full of people forced to confront what they had assumed, one final truth settled into place. Quiet, unmovable, undeniable. He didn't take off to prove who he was. He took off because he already knew. And sometimes the most powerful statement isn't made at the gate. It's made at 30,000 feet, when the system that questioned you is left standing exactly where it exposed itself.